Former police officers, what's the case that was so insane it made you quit your job? I'm a former officer, and my life changed the day I was informed of a woman with an armed intruder in her home. We immediately got in our car and drove over. As soon as we got there we circled the house, but when we went for the front door we found it unlocked. We walked in and did a thorough search of the house, praying to God that she was still alive and that everything was okay, but when we walked up the stairs that hope shattered. We found her unalived, possibly just mere minutes ago. It hurt a lot. Seeing someone not alive never got any easier. We set up the scene and called our forensics team, and that's when everything came crumbling down on me. In some sick, twisted turn of events, my brother's fingerprints were found on the woman's body, and he instantly became the main suspect. I remember my world shattering, and that night I ended up drowning my sorrows. Well, as we dug deeper into the case, we found out the victim had been in a relationship with my brother years ago, and that this was likely the motive. I suppose you would need some context about my older brother. He was always a guy who always had a way of charming everyone around him. Growing up, he was always the golden child in our family. Even as a kid, he had this charm about him that made it impossible for our parents to see anything wrong with him. On the playground, he was the biggest and oldest. He towered over the other kids, and he knew exactly how to use that to his advantage. He was never the type to get his hands dirty. Instead, he'd boss the other kids around, convincing them to do whatever he had in mind. One time, when we were about 8 or 9, Adam wanted this shiny new toy that one of the other kids brought to school. It was a remote-controlled car that everyone was talking about, but instead of just taking it himself, he whispered his plan to a couple of the younger kids and convinced them to steal it during recess. He told them if they took it without him looking, then he'd make sure they'd get a turn to use it later. Of course, they did exactly what he said. Adam watched from the sidelines as the other kids ran off with the toy. When the kid who originally owned the car found out his toy was gone, when the teachers came around asking questions, Adam acted like he didn't have a clue as to what was going on. He even offered to help look for the missing car, and he was good at it, too. He'd march right up to the kid and comfort him, saying, "Don't worry, we'll find it. I'll help you look." That night, the same pattern played out at home. Something had gone missing from our parents, but instead of a toy car, this time, it was a $50 bill from Dad's wallet. But instead of getting nervous or acting guilty, my brother was the first to jump up and offer to help them look for it. He would turn the house upside down, search through cushions, check under furniture, and all the while, our parents would watch him with pride. They were so grateful for his help and praised him for being such a thoughtful son. They never suspected for a moment that Adam was the one who had taken the money in the first place. And when they couldn't find it, they'd thank him for his hard work and would slip him another $20 bill as a reward. He had the whole system figured out. He could do no wrong in their eyes, and he knew it. And he used it to his advantage time and time again. As he got older, his charm grew with him, but so did his recklessness. By the time he was a teenager, he wasn't as careful about covering his tracks. He started hanging out with a rougher crowd. They'd skip classes, smoke behind the gym, and get into trouble just for the thrill of it. I remember one time when he was about 18, he and his friends decided to break into the school after hours. They didn't have a plan or any particular reason. They just wanted to see if they could get away with it. They smashed a window, ransacked a couple of classrooms, and spray-painted graffiti on the walls. They got caught. Of course, the school had cameras, and it wasn't long before the police were at our door. I'll never forget the look on our parents' faces when they found out. They were in shock but not angry. They were more upset that their good son could be accused of something like this. When the police left, he just shrugged it off like it was no big deal. Our parents didn't even raise their voices. Instead, they sat him down and talked to him in that gentle, pleading way they always did. They asked him to do better, and that was it. No punishment, no grounding, not even a stern word. It was the same story every time. He'd nod along, promise to do better, and then be out the door the next night, back with the same crowd, doing the same stupid things. It was like he was testing how far he could push them, how much he could get away with, and every time they let him off the hook, he pushed a little further. But fast forward to now, the evidence started rolling in. The crime scene techs found fingerprints on the woman's clothes, and they matched my brother's. I knew I had to talk to him and find out what the hell was going on, but when I called his phone, he didn't answer. I started to panic.
For a half second, I started to believe that his involvement in the unaliving was true, but I pushed the thought out of my head just as fast as it had come.
I raced to his house, hoping it was all just some big misunderstanding. When I got there the place was a mess. It looked like he had packed up and left in a hurry. Clothes were strolled all over the place, drawers were yanked out, and his safe was wide open and empty. It became obvious to me that he was on the run. The department launched a full-scale manhunt for him. His face was plastered on every news channel. Every cop in the city was looking for him. And there I was, stuck between being a cop and being a brother. I couldn't wrap my head around the idea that he might be capable of murder, but the evidence was staring me in the face. Days went by with no sign of him. I was barely sleeping, barely eating. My whole life felt like it was unraveling. Then, we got a break. A motel manager on the outskirts of town called in a tip. He said a guy who looked a lot like my brother had checked in under a fake name. I was there in minutes, my heart pounding. The whole drive there I kept thinking if it was really possible that my brother would go as far as to actually take the life of someone. Well, we surrounded the building as soon as we got to the motel, and I remember praying that I wasn't going to have to be the one to put him in cuffs. We did a thorough job. There was no way for him to escape. When we knocked on the door, I called out to him and told him to come out with his hands up. There was this long pause. Then the door creaked open, and my brother stepped out. He looked awful. He was disheveled and pale like he hadn't slept in days. But what hit me the hardest was the look in his eyes. He begged me to believe him. He looked me in my eyes and told me that he didn't do it. He swore to me. I wanted to believe him. And God must have been really laughing at me on that day, because I was indeed the one to put him into cuffs and drag him into the vehicle. After we took Adam into custody, the interrogation began. I had to watch from behind the glass because there was no way I could go into the room myself. It was way too painful. I tried to keep the way I felt separate from my duties, but it was impossible. My brother told the detectives that he was innocent, and that someone had set him up. He cried, pleaded, and tried to convince everyone that he was the victim in all of this. He even tried to appeal to me. He said that I knew him and that he would never do anything like this. He tried to convince the detectives that he is my brother, and by relation there was no way he could ever do something like this. He begged me directly to help him. Every fiber of my being wanted to believe him. But the evidence was too much. His fingerprints were on the weapon, the timeline matched perfectly, and there was his history with the woman which we found by combing through her social media profiles. Everything pointed to him, and there were no other suspects. What if he really was innocent? I couldn't just ignore that possibility, not when it was my own brother on the line. I threw myself into the investigation. I went over every piece of evidence, and interviewed everyone who might have seen or heard something. I was desperate to find anything that could prove my brother's innocence. One night it was late, and the station was almost empty. I had been going through the crime scene photos again, and that's when I noticed a small, faint smudge on the back door frame in one of the photos. I zoomed in, and my heart sank. It was a fingerprint, slightly smeared, like someone had grabbed the door in a hurry. I checked the forensic report and compared it to my brother's prints. It was a perfect match. This was the back door, the one the woman rarely used. My brother had been there, likely trying to leave unnoticed. I looked closer at the photo and saw something else on the ground beneath the print. It was a tiny, sparkling object. I hadn't noticed it before. I had the text enhance the image and identify the object. It was the woman's necklace. The necklace was lying on the ground where his fingerprint was smeared on the frame. The truth hit me like a punch to the gut. He had struggled with her, ripped the necklace from her neck, and then fled. He had unalived this woman. The more I looked, the more the evidence pointed to him. And yet, I couldn't let it go. The trial was one of the hardest things I've ever had to sit through. Watching the prosecution lay out their case, piece by piece, was like being stabbed over and over again. They painted my brother as a cold-blooded monster, someone who with no remorse took a human life. They said that he had snapped and taken out his anger on his ex-girlfriend. And with the evidence they had, it was hard to argue with them. The defense tried to poke holes in the prosecution's case, but it wasn't enough. I sat there, day after day, feeling like I was living in a nightmare. My brother often tried to get me to help him, but I didn't know what to do. I was torn between my brother and my job. As the trial dragged on, I could see the toll it was taking on everyone. My parents were a wreck, my colleagues didn't know how to talk to me, and I felt like I was losing myself in the process. I couldn't sleep, couldn't think straight. All I could do was keep going, keep searching for something that would prove he was innocent. But no matter how hard I tried, the truth was staring me in the face. The day the verdict came in, my world shattered. They told him that he was guilty on multiple counts, including first-degree unaliving, breaking and entering, and assault with a deadly weapon. The words hit me like a sledgehammer. I looked over at my brother, and he just stared at the ground. He had always been the one to get away with everything, but now he was going to spend the rest of his life in prison. The sentence was life without parole. The vision of Adam being led away in handcuffs replayed in my mind. After that, I couldn't keep going as a cop. Every time I put on the uniform, I was reminded of what had happened, of how I had failed to protect my own brother. I felt like I should have done something before it got that far. I blamed myself for how he turned out. I handed in my resignation, packed up my things, and tried to figure out how to move on. The months after my brother's conviction were some of the hardest of my life. I tried to move on, but it was impossible. I kept replaying everything in my head, wondering if there was something I could have done differently, something I missed. I started working as a private investigator, but I avoided anything that even remotely reminded me of his case. Then, out of the blue, I got a letter from my brother. It was short, just a few lines, but it was enough to turn my world upside down all over again. It read, "I lied. I wasn't innocent, but I wasn't alone either. There's more to this than you know. I'm sorry." My stomach dropped as I read the words. What did he mean? Wasn't alone? I thought. I knew I couldn't just let it go. I had to find out the truth, no matter what it cost me. I folded up the letter and hid it in a place where no one would find it, a hidden hole that I had behind a small painting in my house. I reopened the case, not officially, but on my own. I started digging, retracing my steps, re-interviewing witnesses. I was looking for anything that might shed light on what my brother had written. It wasn't easy since most people didn't want to talk to me, and the trail had gone cold. But I couldn't stop. I needed to know the truth. After reading Adam's letter, I was determined to get to the bottom of her death and my brother's involvement in it.